Today we're diving into a high-stakes battle that's all about the future of America's financial watchdogs. It seems like a pretty simple question, right? But the answer? Well, that's at the heart of this incredibly complex story that's still unfolding in Washington, D.C. So let's get right into it. Okay, so to really get what this conflict is all about, we've got to meet the main players first. You know, the key agencies that were literally designed to be your financial guardians. So you've got this agency, the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau. You'll hear it called the CFPB a lot. And it was set up to operate with a good bit of independence, you know, shielded from the daily grind of politics. The same goes for another huge player here, the Federal Reserve. But lately, that very independence, it's exactly what's put them right in the middle of some really intense political and legal pressure. Alright, so the first major front in this whole battle really opened up at the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau. I mean, this is an agency whose entire reason for being is to be your advocate in the financial world. So after a new acting director was appointed, a whole series of events went down, and fast. They just dramatically shifted the agency's course. We're talking within a single year. Its funding, its operations, even its enforcement activities. They were all facing these challenges that were, frankly, totally unprecedented. Okay, and right at the heart of all this is how the agency gets its money. See, Congress set up the CFPB to be funded by the Federal Reserve, specifically so it wouldn't have to go through the yearly congressional budget battles. But the agency's new leadership came in and argued, hey, we can only get funded if the Fed is actually profitable. Now that was a brand new interpretation, and it effectively cut off its own financial lifeline for the 2026 fiscal year. Look at this. Look at the direct impact this had on actual oversight. The number of what they call supervisory events, which are basically just checkups to make sure financial companies are treating you fairly, was projected to just plummet. I mean, we're talking from over 600 a year on average down to less than 70. That's a huge drop. So then, the Government Accountability Office, they're like an independent watchdog for Congress, they put out a report detailing all these changes. And in response, the CFPB's very own chief legal officer just publicly dismissed the findings. It really just goes to show you the deep conflict that was happening both inside and outside the agency over this new direction. Well, as you can probably guess, this whole dispute landed in court pretty quickly. The union for the CFPB employees, they sued. They argued that the administration was pretty much dismantling the agency without getting Congress's approval. On the other side, the government said, nope, we're just using our legal discretion over staffing and how we operate. Okay, so let's shift gears and talk about the Federal Reserve for a minute, because this pressure, it definitely wasn't limited to just the CFPB. This is where things get really intense. The Federal Reserve Chair, Jerome Powell, he actually issued this pretty extraordinary public statement. This was right after the Department of Justice hit the Fed with grand jury subpoenas. He called their investigation, which was supposedly about a building renovation, a pretext. He was basically suggesting the real reason for all this was political pressure over the Fed's decisions on interest rates. And from there, the conflict just kept escalating. I mean, all the way to the Supreme Court. The whole case was about the attempt to fire a Federal Reserve governor, Lisa Cook, and it raised these really fundamental questions about how much power a president actually has to remove leaders from these independent agencies. Yeah, trying to remove a sitting Fed governor is something that hasn't happened in over 100 years, and the whole thing was based on accusations about one of our old mortgage applications. And it's worth noting, these allegations were later cast into some pretty significant doubt by media reports. So while all this intense pressure was being put on these federal agencies, state governments from all over the country started to organize. They began to push back, opening up a response on a whole bunch of different legal fronts. What you started to see were these large groups of state attorneys general, and often from both parties, filing lawsuits. They were challenging the CFPB's defunding. They were fighting back against moves to override their own state-level consumer protection laws, and they were suing to keep funding for infrastructure projects in their states. Okay, so, agencies, lawsuits, a lot of political maneuvering in DC. Why does any of this actually matter for your wallet, for your personal finances? Well, get this. According to a Senate committee report, all these efforts to rein in the CFPB have cost American consumers an estimated, wait for it, $19 billion. And that's just in the last year. And this chart does a great job of breaking down where that huge number comes from. We're talking billions lost because enforcement cases against companies were just dismissed, money from settlements that never actually made it to consumers, rules targeting junk fees that were rolled back, and of course, changes to the program where you can file a complaint. So what does this mean in the real world, for you? Well, it translates to less oversight on things like errors in your credit report. You know, the stuff that can stop you from getting a loan. It means weaker enforcement against all those junk fees on credit cards and overdrafts, fewer protections from those sneaky subscription traps. The point is, these aren't just abstract political fights. They have a direct, real-world impact on your wallet. And all of this really leaves us with a pretty critical question about the whole system that was designed to protect all of us in the first place. Thanks so much for joining this explainer.